Thank you for the introduction. Glad to be here. And my topic today will talk about the product, which is a long-acting combination of two different monoclonal antibodies, the Tixagevimab and Cilgevimab, which is basically an extra layer of protection for the most vulnerable patients in COVID-19. Basically, this is a medication that took the EUA or emergency authorization to be used for patients who they are immune compromised, and either they have the ability to take the vaccination without having the ability to mount their immune system after the vaccination, or there is a contraindication to take the vaccine from one reason or another. This is basically the company disclaimer. This is my personal disclosure. And basically, just a reminder, we're almost 600 million confirmed cases, and the mortality is above 6 million from the COVID-19. So basically, the global burden of COVID-19 is substantial. In UAE, we have more than 1 million confirmed case, and the mortality rate is 2,342. That was up till September 23rd. One of the lowest mortality is in the region in general and in UAE in specific. This is just to show you the graph of the number of cases. And we've seen that there is a rapid increase in the number of cases, which was marked by the arrow here, since the first Omicron was reported in December 1st. A reminder about different variants from COVID-19 and the timeline starting from the Alpha, then the Beta, then the Gamma, then the Delta, and last one, Omicron since December 1st. A subvariant or subgroup of Omicron reported starting from the B1 all the way now we are reaching 4 and 5 are the predominant two different variants all over the world. Basically, why it's important to know about this, because three different parameters or criteria for the variant to be really concerning for the healthcare sector or for the population in general, how quick or easy to transmit from one patient to another, and can induce severe cases or the severity of the illness, and also the ability to evade the immune response. And we mean by immune response whether the patient has the natural immunity from previous infection or received the vaccination. So basically, those patients who they are immune compromised, they tend to have more risk of getting the COVID infection. They are 3 times more than the other population to require hospitalization, 1.5 times more risk of requiring ICU admission, 2 times they might need vasopressor at certain point during their hospital stay, and their risk of mortality or likely to die are twice as the other immune competent population. Who are those patients? Any type of blood or hematological malignancies or other type of cancer, patients who they are actively receiving chemo, transplant patient, dialysis patient who they are taking certain type of immune suppressant for different reason, biological treatment in rheumatology patient, other indications to receive immune suppressant for autoimmune disease, and basically patient who they have primary immune deficiency as well. Those patients who they are immune compromised, more vulnerable, they are 40 to 45% of the hospitalized patients with breakthrough cases are immune compromised. And also about or close to 3% of the vaccinated population, they consider at increased risk of inadequate immune response to the COVID-19 vaccine. This is a nice publication in New England Journal published April of this year, And it's telling you that with the different variant, we have different effectiveness of the available vaccine against COVID-19 by comparing the effectiveness of two different vaccination, whether it's an mRNA technology, such as Pfizer product, or the non-mRNA technology, such as AstraZeneca. We know that this study showed that the effectiveness, even with the booster dose of one of the mRNA vaccine, is the efficacy is about 65 to 70%. And basically this immunity start fading away or waned over 10-week period. So the two doses definitely are not enough. Even with the third dose, we still have about 1/3 of the patients, according to the publication, they don't have a full immunity that they can get from the vaccination. That will take us to the product of the day that we're going to talk about, which is basically a long-acting combination of two different monoclonal antibody. With all this new variant, just a reminder, the other monoclonal antibodies became out of the equation, starting from the very early Vaccination product by pharmaceutical company that they ended up combining or merging with another monoclonal, the Tixagevimab. Since the Delta variant, that monoclonal combination stopped working. Then they discovered the other combined monoclonal antibody, the Imdevimab, Cilgevimab. And again, these two combinations stopped working since the beginning of the Omicron. We ended up with one monoclonal antibody, the Cilgevimab, that even with according to the CDC and the NIH recommendation, they stopped recommending this monoclonal antibody because of the BA.4 and 5 subvariant of Omicron. So basically, this is a medication that is combined of two monoclonal antibody that bind into two distinct epitopes. And it also has two characteristic features. It basically has an extended half-life, which is on an average can give you protection for about 6 months period. And it will reduce the antibody-dependent adverse event. And the antibody-dependent, it's very important to remember that part of the severity of the illness and the complications of COVID-19 is the development of autoantibody against the virus itself. So these are one of the reasons for developing consequences or complications from COVID-19 infection because of the antibody-dependent events or adverse events. So basically, this will reduce this ADE effect of the virus itself. So basically, initially approved for pre-exposure prophylaxis in high-risk patient according to the proven trial that I'm going to talk about, but also there is an ongoing studies and upcoming more recommendations for this combined monoclonal antibody. So we have basically 4 different clinical trials. I'm going to start with the one on the left side, the proven trial, which is basically for prevention of symptomatic patient in high-risk population. And this is the article that was published with the data from the clinical trial. And basically, it's to study the efficacy and the safety of the medication for a pre-exposure prophylaxis of COVID-19 patient for those who they have higher risk of inadequate response to the vaccine and they have increased risk of exposure to SARS-CoV-2 or both of them. So basically, they took about 5,200 patients. They divided them into 2 subgroups or 2 arms. The ratio is 2 to 1. 2/3 of the patients, they received the combination of the Tixa and Cilgevimab, and 1/3 of the patients, they just received the placebo. What's the primary endpoint? Basically, the efficacy endpoint depending on the development of positive PCR symptomatic illness within 183 days, which is like 6 months period, post-single dose. And what about the safety of, endpoint? Any adverse event that is reported up to 15 months post-dose. 78% of the patient with comorbidities, diabetic, cardiovascular, cancer, COPD, and others. The age group, 57%, more than 57% age 60 or below, 43% age 60 or above. Different ethnicities, and the majority, about 73%, are white Caucasian patients. So the data was reviewed after 3 months and after 6 months. So the data, according to the 3-month data, you can see that there is 77% relative risk reduction in those patients who they received the combined monoclonal antibody versus the placebo group. And we mean by a reduction, it's a reduction in the incidence of symptomatic COVID with this monoclonal compared to the placebo. When they analyze the data up to 6 months, actually the reduction is even further in the relative risk reduction, and it's up to 83%. Also about the efficacy, I should mention that the efficacy was maintained in the face of Delta surge. This is number one. And zero severe COVID cases was reported in the monoclonal arm versus 5 cases in the placebo arm. Also, I just want to mention that 2 COVID-related mortality or deaths were reported both in the placebo arm and occurring after the unblinding the data or the result. In terms of the adverse event, there is no really major difference between the monoclonal arm and the placebo arm. And if you see that the reported severe cases, a very small number of patients, even less than 1.5%. The majority of the adverse events are headache, fatigue, and cough. And some cases, which is very minor number of cases reported for cardiovascular complications, although those patients who they found that they developed cardiovascular complications, they already had previous history or underlying risk for cardiovascular disease. This is just a summary to remind you about the efficacy, the safety. Data showed efficacy up to 6 months with a very minimal adverse event. Now we will move to the outpatient treatment, which is basically called the TACKLE trial. The TACKLE trial basically is the indication to use this medication as a treatment during the early phase or the early disease, which is basically similar to what we were doing with the Cilgevimab, the monoclonal antibody. So basically, it's a clinical trial, 1-to-1 ratio, and basically studying above 900 patients. Primary endpoint, basically either development of severe COVID or mortality from any cause through or up to 29 days after receiving the injection. And also the safety and if the patient can tolerate the medication or not by reporting any severe or adverse event. Secondary endpoint, basically they reported any mortality up to 168 days post-treatment, and proportion of patients with respiratory failure up to 1 month, and a proportion of patients who they have progression of COVID-19 associated symptoms up to 1 month, and also the level of the viral level by PCR from nasal swab, or any adverse effect and the pharmacokinetics of the medication. Again, 90% of the patients with comorbidities, 87% less than age 65, and 13% above 65, and also different demography or epidemiology of patients. What did we see after the analysis of those 900 patients plus through 29 days of post-dose? There is 50% relative risk reduction in severity of COVID or the mortality in the monoclonal group compared to the placebo if the medication was given in less than 7 days from the development of symptoms. What about if it's less within the first 5 days of developing the symptoms? the relative risk reduction up to 67%. Okay, what about if we did it even less than 3 days? Definitely the relative risk reduction will be even higher. Again, in terms of the safety, there is no major difference between the placebo group and the monoclonal group. This is what I just mentioned, that when they analyzed data by giving the dose within the 3 days from the development of the symptoms, the relative risk reduction went up to 88%. So this is just a summary about using the medication as a treatment for during the early symptoms or early phase of COVID. We showed data if it's less than a week, less than 5 days, less than 3 days. And with, again, no significant adverse effect from the medication. The question is, this study of the preventive trial, the early treatment started November, I think November or October 2020. And it's an ongoing study, but most of the publications are during the other variants of COVID-19. So the question is the Evusheld still effective against the Omicron variant? This is just to show you that we still have a good neutralization effect of this monoclonal antibody combination against the different Omicron variants. So definitely still demonstrating prophylaxis. And also during the Omicron surge, there is Evusheld will give enough protection for fully vaccinated immune compromised patient against COVID-19. These are the different clinical trials used in different group of population: kidney transplant patient, hematological malignancy patients, other patients who they receive biological treatment, for example, for other chronic diseases. For the administration and the dosing, basically, this is just the leaflet of the product. And basically, you can store it in 2 to 8%. And basically, you apply it, or patient receive the medication as an intramuscular injection, 2 different intramuscular injection, 1 for each product. Now, the standard dose right now in UAE, according to the guideline, is a 300 milligram, which is 150 milligram of each product. For the international data, they recommended to increase the dose up to 600 milligram, mainly for the prophylaxis and also for if we use it as an early treatment. And the reason why, because they found that one of the 2 monoclonals, I think the Tixagevimab, showed less effectiveness with the new subvariant of Omicron. So they decided to increase or double the dose of the 2 product up to 600 milligrams for better neutralization and effectiveness against the new subvariant of COVID-19. And definitely this medication does not contain any preservatives. That's why if you open the vial, it has to be given within a short period of time, few hours. So this is the EUA approval, basically. It's not FDA approved yet, but there is an emergency authorization given for the combined. So it's part of the national protocol or the national guideline for the UAE or the country. And basically, there is a clear indication and also the dosing and all the recommendations for it. I think I'm going to stop here, but just a reminder, I think this is going to be a good opportunity to consider it for an early treatment by looking at the other options that we have right now for the treatment of COVID-19. Really, we don't have that many options. Most of the monoclonal, they are out of the equation, including the Cilgevimab. We have 2 oral antiviral medications, the molnupiravir and the Paxlovid. Either there is a lot of drug-drug interactions. When we talk about the Paxlovid, there is not that much protective or effectiveness of the molnupiravir. Remdesivir is available, which is still a good drug, but it's an IV treatment, so you need a lot of logistic to use in the outpatient setting. Thank you.